And we're going to talk a little Texas A&M Aggie football now. The Aggies will begin SEC play in the Swamp this weekend against the Florida Gators. Andrew Monaco, he is the voice of the Texas A&M Aggies on the radio broadcast. Really appreciate you coming on and talking some A&M football with us today.
Howdy, Chase. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so like I mentioned, SEC play begins this week. But before we get into football, I'm just curious. First year under Mike Elko, if there's any culture differences that are really noticeable at the program. I know you're close to the program, doing all the games and everything. What would you say are some differences maybe this year as far as culture things under Coach Elko?
Chase, I think the thing that jumps out is accountability. I think that was what Mike wanted to set up from day one. So when a certain transfer was late for a meeting, guess what? That door was locked. They weren't going to wait for that person. That started very early for that. I love the other thing, and not that it was bad in the past. I think the hiring of Tommy Moffitt from LSU as a strength coach has already paid dividends for a couple of players. Le'Veon Moss has already mentioned he feels like he's in the best shape of his life. You want to be a bellwether back, you've got to be in shape to be able to do that. And those are just a couple of things that jump out. I think what helps Mike is the familiarity with Texas A&M and knowing that, but this is his program. But I think the defensive players who played under him before he left for Duke understand what was needed. I think some of those recruits have an idea because he would talk to them about it, and now the entire team does it or understands what he wants. And that's for the entire staff. Chase, I know after Notre Dame, he talked about how, we can't point fingers at one another. And he thought that was a little bit of a problem in the past. He said the first thing you have to do is go look in the mirror. What could you have done better? How could we have coached better? How could you have played better? How could you as a staff prepared? I think that's it. I would have to say accountability might be number one on that list.
Yeah, that's good for A&M. You mentioned the Notre Dame game. Big win against McNeese this past week, but you start the season off at home and in a game that, it was one of the most exciting of that opening day of college football was Notre Dame coming to Texas A&M. Just from your perspective, calling the game just and how it played out, just give me your thoughts on that opener there against Notre Dame.
Electric atmosphere. Absolutely. I don't know if there's a better way to start a season than having number 7 come in and it being Notre Dame and knowing that this was on the schedule for a while and then it finally is here. You know how it is. You see all the home and homes that you have down the line, and we knew Notre Dame was coming. And 24 and 25 is when that series starts. Just fascinating. And with the new start of an era, was great. The game seemed to be played in a phone booth, Chase. It was physical for week one. It's the dangers of week one because you have to do every adjustment. Everything's new. With the transfer portal, I can just imagine what preparation was like for each coaching staff that for A&M, you've got to find out not just that where Bo Collins played at Clemson. You had to know what Mike Denbrock did at LSU. You had, then you had the storylines of Riley Leonard being Mike Elko's quarterback at Duke. I just think it's a great, and I love it for college. I don't know if coaches will agree, but I love it for college football fans. I love that first weekend, if you will, not including week 0, having those marquee games. And as you know, they're not always played on campus. Sometimes they're on neutral site, which adds its own excitement as well. It's almost like a first week bowl game. This one being on campus was a lot of fun. And some of the other storylines, they ran out to power. It was the best kept secret at A&M. And in this day and age of social media, they're not always kept. Secrets aren't always kept. So I like the throwback to the white helmets that you had seen from A&M in the past. To me, it's a lot of things of why we say that Mike Elko gets Texas A&M. Now, he didn't get the win, but as he said, if this was just a 1-week build, then of course you come up short. But he's building a program, and I thought it was a really good start for A&M. But I'm telling you, it was electric, and I think football is going to benefit from that. I think all the sports on campus are going to benefit because there were so many recruits who were there and in that atmosphere on that Saturday night.
Yeah, and I want to get into the team and everything, but I do have to. I've never been to a game at Texas A&M. That's on my list of places I want to go watch a college football game. But for those of us who have not been to Kyle Field for a football game, take us through what that experience is like.
Where do you start? I guess at midnight, right? Midnight yell practice is where you start. And Chase, there were 45,000 people at
Wow.
midnight yell practice. And when you realize that a student section, it's 38,000 students will be at Kyle Field on the Saturday night as opposed to the Friday night at midnight. You realize that's bigger than some stadiums. And uh, that is special. Everyone together for that game day special, obviously seeing the tailgating, and everybody has the tailgating. I think it's the combination then of spirit walk by the players. I think it's when the core steps off and they walk throughout campus, that's still being an integral part of Texas A&M. And what I love about Kyle Field is not that I'm discounting game ops. You don't have to tell the 12th man that it's third down on defense. They know it. You'll hear that there's a buzz. There's that they yell. You can just hear that throughout, and then it rises. From my first game there, where my partner Dave Elmendorf asked me if I felt it, it actually does sway, and it was swaying against Notre Dame. What I thought was really special was that place was full very early, and they were into it, whether it was the towels that they were waving and so much anticipation and that buzz. And then what I think, obviously, your new players, whether they're freshmen or transfers, understand, okay, this is what I signed up for, and you realize, okay, this is why I came to Texas A&M. What I think is then the reality really hits is almost 95,000 are there last Saturday at 11:45 for McNeese. That's when you realize, man, you got to understand who you're playing for there. And the same thing, that game day is something special. I missed it. You know what I mean? Like, I miss it. You don't do it since December. You're coming off a baseball run and you're in Omaha, and that is special on its own. And Olsen Field at Bluebell Park was special throughout that run. And then a short off season, which is great because that means baseball did very well. But you forget why it's so special on that Saturday. I truly believe this, Chase, and it's not the only one in the country. I think Kyle Field is a bucket list type stadium for a college football fan. There are a lot on my list, some that I have been able to see, some that I haven't, some that have been flat out gems. I think Kyle Field, if you are a football fan, you need to take in a Texas A&M home game.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely try to get out there one day for a Texas A&M game. Talking about this year's team, Connor Weigman, at quarterback, battled the injury a year ago. He's back. How would you say how would you kind of put into words the start for his season?
Yeah, disappointing against Notre Dame and here's the thing, by getting injured in week 4 against Auburn, you missed the rest of the 8 games of that season to get all those throws, and understand that maybe, and it was footwork in week 1 against Notre Dame, and it was very un-Connor Weigman like that. That's what I think stood out more than anything else. He's a baseball player, right? As he talked about the next pitch, but it was more than just, okay, we're going to go out there on Saturday against McNeese and it's all going to fix itself. He was going to fix it. And that's what he saw on Sunday when he saw the film. And that's what Colin Klein had seen. And they weren't in the same room. They noticed the same thing. And he went right to work. There's a diligence to him. There's a leader in him that I really think happened in this offseason. Like, I think obviously he missed it. He missed the game. He missed that camaraderie, but he knew, and he had a chance to leave, but Mike Elko had an awful lot of trust, and he had to battle for that. It wasn't like he was assumed to be, well, you may have assumed he was going to be number 1, but he was going to have to win that job, and he did. And I say he's got the it factor, but he didn't have it against Notre Dame. And how do you figure that out? And he realized it was my feet. Now I know it's McNeese. I get it. But the throws look like what Connor had done in the past. His very first game was in relief of Haynes King at South Carolina 2 years ago. And he's thrust in the fourth quarter of that one. But then his first game being against Ole Miss, getting that start. And that's what you saw. You saw the release. You saw the quick release. I thought this may be unfair. I thought he looked unsure against Notre Dame, and I thought he got antsy. And to me, I don't know if that was the injury or if it was, and when I say between the ears, knowing that how is my offensive line? Now I think he can learn to trust that offensive line. I thought he was very quick and he wasn't going through progressions. I thought he did against McNeese. Look, the test is Florida on Saturday. It's not against the Cowboys. No offense to McNeese. But he had to get that right, because if he struggled, then you were looking at, boy, there's a deeper issue here. And Mike Elko thought, you know what, maybe it was hearing all offseason, boy, is the offensive line going to be any good? Wow, Notre Dame's defensive line's really good. He was antsy and he seemed to rush. He looked way more comfortable. I love the quick release for him. I work with Dave Elmendorf, who's a safety, and he says that difference in the quick release is the difference between you getting a hand on that ball and an incompletion and it's complete. And then when you watch the receivers and someone like a Cyrus Allen who comes from Louisiana Tech, instead of waiting for that ball to come into your body, using those hands, like that's quicker. Will that be the difference, that release, the difference between a completion or a turn and run or an incompletion? That's what was good to see against McNeese and for 2 quarters, and you had to get some other players in. But I just think there's something about him. He loves the game. He loves to play. He loves to lead. He loves the responsibility. He got on up at that podium and said, these are the faults. Point blank, period. I didn't do this. It takes a lot to say that as opposed to escaping from that. And I think he's got not just that ability, I think he's got the confidence in his teammates as well.
Looking at the running back room, obviously Reuben Owens was a tough loss to start this season. You hate to see a guy go out before the season even starts, but I've been impressed with Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels. Those are 2 guys who, when you coming in, were going to be great backs for A&M. What do you make of the skill guys that Weigman has around him?
I think you have not just experience, I think you have some maturity as well back there with both Moss, Daniels, and I'll even throw in E.J. Smith, who was at Stanford, whom his head coach, David Shaw, said was a complete back. And I think that's the growth of Amari Daniels, is more of a complete back. You always knew what he could do with the ball in his hands. What was he going to do without the ball in his hands? And Mike Elko just raved this week about the pass protection, a couple times picking up the blitzers there. Le'Veon Moss, the same thing. Complete backs, and in a Colin Klein offense, you're going to need to be a receiver in anybody's offense. And I think fans need to understand this. The reason why you're going to get carries or not get carries is what else are you going to do when you're on that field? So you've got to pass protect, you've got to block, you got to run the right routes, right? You got to hit the holes when they're there for your that your offensive line is giving you. I'm not sure there's a bellwether back, but I like what each of those running backs bring. I think Le'Veon Moss runs hard, and I thought he did that both weeks so far. And he really gave all the credit to Tommy Moffitt, the strength coach. I don't think he was in as good. I think he thought he was in good shape and now realizes what good shape is. And I think he can feel the difference. And for an athlete, that absolutely gives you more confidence.
Yep.
Chase, I call it all the work in the dark. And to me, workouts are work in the dark. Mike Elko said this: not a single lift was missed by this team. Not a single one.
Wow.
Where does that pay off? Sometimes week 1, could be later, but it shows that solidarity and what they took in and how much it meant to them. But Le'Veon felt it already has paid off for him. And again, I just think that's the confidence. I don't think, again, there's not a marquee guy on there, but I think it is a very solid running back stable. And that's what Troop, as they call him, the running backs coach, Trooper Taylor, who Mike brings from Duke. They truly believe it is a stable, and they're competitive with one another, complementary of one another, different skills. So they're going to do it by committee, and I think Mike Elko's happy with that committee.
And I know we'll learn much more about the team this week against Florida and in weeks to come. But on the defensive side, that's Mike Elko's side. Obviously, he was a defensive coordinator there. He's a great defensive mind. What do you make of this Texas A&M defense so far?
Yeah, that defensive line is stout. I think bringing Nick Scorton in from Purdue is a big, big addition, and he's from this area, Bryan High School, and back home, if you will. I also think one of the keys for this defense is the returning players, and I think Shamar Turner is one of those guys. He was tempted by the NFL. I think staying an extra year is not only going to be beneficial for A&M, but also for Shamar Turner, and he's going to have that. I call the DeMarvin Leal, who's now with the Steelers, a little inside, a little outside. That versatility, I think, will help him next level and to understand both positions. Cassius Howe coming from Bowling Green, I think, is a big one. They love this kid, Rylan Kennedy, who has been fantastic on third down. Young kid. And sometimes some of the more exciting players are the ones who it all comes together as freshmen. And then when they realize, okay, I had my first year under my belt, they blossom. Same thing with redshirt guys. Like they blossom that next year because everything starts to click. Very athletic, I think, on those edges. Shamar Stewart is another one. Very athletic on those edges, which is big. And I think one of the keys for Texas A&M has always been the interior as well. And with DJ Hicks staying, Albert Regis, Rodas Johnson coming from Wisconsin, you have guys who have played snaps on the collegiate level. I equate it to baseball. I don't care where you've played, but you've seen the shapes of pitches, and the more that you see, the more you can identify quickly. I think it's the same thing for a lot of these transfers they have played. The sacks aren't there. The quarterback hurries are there. They've disrupted. And they disrupted Riley Leonard a little bit in week number 1 and more last week. The 2 interceptions were because they hurried the quarterback there. But a defensive line is absolutely going to set the tone for Texas A&M. Love the linebackers. Torian York, terrific captain once again. And I like who he has with him. Damian Sanford is another one of those freshmen becoming a sophomore. Scooby Williams, who has played at Florida, SEC back. Solomon DeShields, a Pitt linebacker. You play for Pat Narduzzi on that defense. You got to be good. And what was fun against McNeese was seeing 2 freshmen get valuable game time because you can't replicate. You can't practice it. You got to go through it. And Tristan Jernigan and Jordan Lockhart are a couple that's going to be valuable, and you don't know when you're going to need them. They shored up the back end, and it was needed. And it wasn't so much because of injury or last year they struggled. The injuries that hit them, they were very inexperienced back there. Good, talented freshmen that I remember Jimbo saying, I'd like to play them 20 to 25 snaps, but they were forced to play 50 snaps. Chase, from snap 26 to 50 is when young players get in trouble, right? Yep. It's too much. And you wish you could ease them in. You can't ease a cornerback in against Ole Miss. You can't ease a cornerback in against LSU. Baptism by fire. But I think it helped guys like, you got Javon Thomas now on a corner with Will Lee III, who played at Kansas State. But Javon got that valuable experience where just he's there, but just didn't make the play against Jaden Daniels and LSU and just didn't make the play against Jackson Dart. Now he's made the play and he's won that cornerback position. And Tyreek Chappelle now at a nickel and Bryce Anderson moving to safety. I just think it's all valuable in that experience. So much for a Mike Elko defense. And I need to be fair. It's Jay Bateman who's the DC, but Mike's hands are going to be all over this, is what's between the ears. And that's from his former players, Chase, who all talk about Mike. They got more comfortable. And it went from top down to now talking with. And I remember in the early going, Mike was doing all the talking. And then after a couple years, Damani Richardson could sit in that backfield and talk with Mike and tell him what he's seeing. And Leon O'Neal Jr. could do that. And Antonio Johnson could do that when Mike was still here. When they get to that, very similar to what Notre Dame has under Al Golden and Marcus Freeman, when they get there, and that's where A&M was before Mike left, I think this makes this defense even more dangerous. And I asked Mike, can you get there a little quicker with the personnel? Like every coach, he goes, I hope so, but I think they have the type of players that can get there quickly. Will it be week 3? Don't know, but it's going to have to be very good against the Gators.
Yeah, it will. And speaking of Florida, on the road this Saturday for this SEC matchup, first one for each team for the season. Just in the prep you've done so far for Florida, what do you know about the Gators? Kind of what are the challenges going to be for A&M?
Between Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway, who the Aggies were really in on for DJ Lagway, he's from Willis, Texas, and he's been around the program, and a lot of players know him, and he was terrific against Samford. But Graham Mertz, the same thing. You're going to take snaps at Wisconsin? Yeah, that's what you want to do. And you've got to prepare for both, because I don't think it matters who they play. I think we're going to see both. I think there's going to be packages for DJ Lagway, and I think it's a matter of what Mike was saying this week. You have to be prepared. You can't prepare along the lines of you can't install this for Mertz, all of this for Lagway, and have two preparations. It's too much. It's overload. So what you do is say, okay, if he's in, this is what we're, you're prepared. Mike seemed to think it's almost like week one, where you've got to adjust a lot quicker for something like this. Got to know tendencies. Will this situation arise? And that's when you look and see, okay, what does a Billy Napier do in the past on offense for things like that? Loves the backs. The other thing he brought up, and I really don't think this is a shot at the ACC, but he knows this is an SEC offense and an SEC defense. And, those are two different things when you're comparing things with conferences. He thinks the D-line of Florida will rotate a lot of players, which he likes to do as well, keep them fresh. He thinks a guy like Shamar James is an impact linebacker. He loves their back end. And it's always because he's a safety guy, right? So he's going to look at the back end and see how that is. He thinks they have playmakers. And Chase, I think that's what it is week in and week out in the SEC, that you may be known for offense, but an SEC defense, is going to be that caliber. Florida's that way also. And it's more than just, see, this is where I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. The reason why stadiums and going on the road is difficult isn't the fans. It's the talent on the field that makes it hard. Yeah. It's not like Alabama's the most intimidating place. It's intimidating? Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, Patrick Surtain. That's intimidating on defense. You know what I mean? Like, you love the atmospheres, but when you have the talent to go with it, that's when it's impressive. That's what Florida has. Very much like A&M. I thought Florida probably was a little more disappointing. The expectations coming in, and that's what Florida is dealing with, expectations. And that's hard because that's external. Your program has to be internal. That's all that matters. But they're dealing with expectations. You're starting off with a rivalry game against Miami, which is a better team than they were last year. And then everyone's saying, yeah, but it was Samford, right? So A&M, the disappointment of losing to Notre Dame, but yeah, it was McNeese. Week 3 becomes important for Billy Napier, who's been there 3 years, the third week of Mike Elko, to make sure that you're on the right path. Where Mike has the advantage is he's still building his program, where the seat's a little hotter for Billy Napier. Fair or unfair, like I said, we all have to speak to it. Sometimes a narrative that's outside of our programs that isn't always fair, but it's the reality of where we are. But Florida, just talent. The Gators are always going to have speed. You can't play in the state of Florida and not have speed. I think that's the game changer for Florida schools. If you don't have speed, you didn't recruit well, and you just can recruit anywhere in that state. South Florida always has the speed. They're special down there. That North Florida, depending on the area, there's a whole lot of toughness in that Milton area, right? Felipe Franks was one of those guys from up in that area. Pensacola, Emmitt Smith, you do that. The Tampa area, Jacksonville is loaded. Having been there 16 years working in Orlando, really came to appreciate that state and football. Then coming to Texas, you appreciate the football in this state as well. But heck, I grew up in Pennsylvania, even that east and west part of Pennsylvania, from special places and some special talents in each of those states.
2:30 Central kickoff for Texas A&M at Florida. For those wanting to listen to the radio broadcast, what time do y'all go on? How can folks listen there to the?
We will go radio at 1:30. 12th Man mobile app is one way. That is the Texas A&M Athletics app. 12th Man mobile app. Learfield's Varsity Network app as well, if you would like to stream or try to find one of our 60 affiliates throughout the state of Texas. That's how we used to do it, Chase. We had to try to dial it in. Streaming's made it way easier to listen to all our friends now doing games. Of course, that also allows me to text them in the middle of games, and I'm not sure they always want to read my text because it usually means my game is done and I'm propped up with a beverage or something sending out that text.
Andrew Monaco, voice of the Texas A&M Aggies. Andrew, really appreciate you taking some time with us. Enjoyed talking to you, and best of luck this weekend. Appreciate your time today.
Chase, thank you so much.